Hello, dear ones, and welcome to Mindful Compassion Hour, the Compassionate Relationship with Suffering series in partnership between the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation and Engaging Mindfulness Forging Meaning. The mission of the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation is to establish optimal quality of life for the Northwest Parkinson's community through awareness, education, advocacy, and care. My name is Barcha Wachtel, and I am the facilitator for this series. I have a master's in social work. I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker, mental health professional, and a trained teacher in what's called Mindful Self-Compassion, a program out of University of California, San Diego. I also have a private practice and mindfulness practice called Engaging Mindfulness Forging Meaning, or just EMFM for short. You can find out more about my therapy and meditation practices at www.emfm.space. The mission of EMFM is to engage people of diverse identities and abilities in cultivating wise attention, deep meaning, and fiercely compassionate ways of being as the foundations for transformation, interconnection, and well-being. The Mindful Compassion Hour Compassionate Relationship with Suffering series is a series of 6 sessions, and these are meant to provide educational support for people living with chronic conditions as well as their caregivers. We're just going to be exploring the basic practices of compassion, both towards ourselves and how we relate to others in difficult situations. These practices are based in psychological neuroscience research, as well as what we call the Buddhist psychology. Learning and responding to difficulty with understanding and kindness helps us to get to these correlations with physical, emotional, and health well-being outcomes. So it's all about learning how to be with those circumstances and what shows up in the end, which we'll explore in more detail. Of course, you can always access any of these resources through the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation website at www.nwpf.org. They're always available there. These resources are free, online, and they're archived, so you can access any previous sessions or series that we've done with Northwest Parkinson's Foundation. EMFM provides support and education for those impacted by ongoing mental and physical health challenges in personal, social, and professional life through professionally facilitated educational seminars. Although the information and support provided can be psychoeducational in nature, these seminars are not counseling, nor are they therapy groups, and EMFM is not providing healthcare services. You should not use the information contained herein for diagnosing or treating any mental or physical health condition. Participation in EMFM NWPF seminars do not create a mental health provider-patient relationship. We recommend always that you consult with a medical and/or mental health professional or medical or mental health advice for medical or mental health advice or information about diagnosis and treatment. By viewing and engaging in a seminar, you're acknowledging and agree that if you feel uncomfortable in any way, you have the right and responsibility to take good care of yourself by disengaging from the seminar or any practice at any time. And that statement is there meant from a heart of kindness and love. So it's not meant to be punishing or any of that. It would defeat the purpose if we had you engage in a process that then you felt uncomfortable or somehow activated in a way that didn't feel very good to you, and then to encourage you to continue to do that. So even the way that we engage the webinars, the practices, how you're approaching the whole thing is meant to come from a space of self-compassion. So if you feel you need to disengage, then you need to pay attention to that. We want you to pay attention to that. This is the usual disclosure slide that just goes over my relationships with different organizations. across the United States, and just making sure that I'm being upfront about where money comes from for particularly the programs of EMFM. And that the opinions and information, regardless of its origin, presented here do not reflect those opinions of any of the above organizations and are solely the responsibility of EMFM. So what are we here for? So as always, we review the information so that with repetition, you become more of the holder of wisdom, just like the information here is being shared with you. And so the way that I work with my clients in therapy, the way that I work with my students, is that I want them to be a good student, but also a good teacher to themselves. And so it doesn't help if people just have to come to me to get the information. I want it to become repetitive so that you learn the information and you become the holder of that wisdom, so that then you can explain to others as well as to yourself of truly deeply understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it. So repetition is the key to shifting and sculpting the brain and changing our emotion states and behaviors. So with that repetition, we always go over this information about what we're actually here for to clarify that. So what mindfulness comes down to are these main points, which is the first one is practice. So we're cultivating awareness. So mindfulness is that cultivation of awareness. We cultivate awareness of our mind and our body, as well as our sense of well-being, right? Our sense of how we take good care of ourselves or not. And also a sense of connection to ourselves and to others, and being aware of all of that. The second thing is core values, which you'll remember from the first session. We talked about basic core values, spirituality, and religion, and that we're not here to practice a particular spirituality or religion, but we're providing a psychological framework by which awareness is practiced. So it's centering in your core values, not necessarily mine. It's not about accepting or rejecting any particular spirituality or religion. You're taking what your spirituality is or your religion, and you're putting those ideas, concepts, and values into the structure of Buddhist psychological practice. So it's not about prayer or anything like that, unless that's important to you. So unless there's a challenge with accessing or being okay with values like love, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, peace, joy, love of learning, appreciation of beauty and excellence, then there's not really going to be anything for you to protest, except that the one thing out of just responsibility to our role of remaining neutral, and that's why I practice the way that I do, that I'm not here to endorse or encourage people to practice a particular spirituality or religion. So the thing that I practice is a neutral, what would be called a secular Buddhist psychology or practice that is really free of any endorsing of any kind of God or particular kind of spirit or that kind of thing. Okay. So I just always like to be really clear on that, because issues have shown up in the past, and I just want people to be really comfortable and fully disclose exactly what we are and are not doing. The third thing there is beginner's mind. It's okay to start at the very beginning every time. So when we feel that we failed or that we've made a mistake, right, you notice there's some judgment that shows up in our own mind toward ourselves or even towards others, that we can recognize, hey, I'm doing the best that I can. Does that mean that I give up or that that somehow makes me weak? No, we just get back on the bike and we learn how to let go of being the expert and actually be in a learning process where we do make mistakes, we do fail, we do all of those things, but not in a judgmental way, just as a part of the learning process. So when you feel that you make a mistake, or if something that I say is maybe different than what you were practicing, then it's okay to just go back to the beginning and just start over again. That's okay. The other thing is that fourth point, which is allowing. We're practicing awareness, that cultivation of awareness with an intention behind it of balanced awareness in this moment. This is the only moment that we have. The only moment that you have is where you're sitting and watching this right now, and the future hasn't happened yet, and the past is in the past. So we're learning how to be in the present moment. So it's not about making something happen. It's not about changing the moment. It's just about being with the moment. And then whatever happens in the future is going to unfold as a result of what we do now. So we're not trying to change anything that we're experiencing right now. As I've mentioned before, some people, when they hear about the work that I do, will say, "Oh my goodness, Archa, I have a friend or myself and really need to do mindfulness or meditation, but I can't sit still. My mind doesn't cooperate with emptying or whatever it is." And it's not about any of that. It's all about that present moment awareness. Okay. And then the final point is testing it out, being our own best scientists, which is what this is meant to be within your own tradition, spirituality, religion, of being your own best scientist, testing the process out of awareness and seeing for yourself what happens. Okay. And that's the truth for you. And so that's okay to have that, obviously, within your own experience, to notice what happens and if it makes a difference. So specifically, what this series is meant to do is something that I've actually been working with my clients and students on, is this practicing compassion, not to make our suffering go away, right? Remember, just like we just talked about a moment ago, is that we're not trying to make something happen. We're trying to be with our suffering, not to make our suffering go away, because if we do that, we're actually going to end up in a long battle, because suffering is a part of life. So we don't practice compassion to make our suffering go away. We practice because we are suffering, right? If that comes along, we want to learn how to be with it so that it doesn't end up becoming this big battle in the long run. Chris Germer, one of my favorite teachers in Mindful Self-Compassion, says mindfulness is a special relationship with suffering. Right? So it's as though we are connected with this suffering that shows up, that won't go away in moments of our human experience from birth until death. And it's going to be with us. And so then we have a choice, a conscious choice, to decide, from my values, how do I want to be with this experience right in the moment? Okay. So we're just learning how to do that in this series. So what might show up? And I'm adding in a little bit more detail as we move into this particular session. So we're looking at 3 kinds of reactions to compassion. So it truly happens in the research, and this is Paul Gilbert, which I'll talk about a little bit more, has found that we have these strong emotions that show up when we go to practice compassion towards ourselves. So sometimes they're pleasant, sometimes they're neutral. Those ones are not as risky, although it can feel a little disconcerting if you suddenly find yourself in a state of euphoria or over relaxation, where we just kind of fall into a pile of jello. Or if we get into laughing fits or giggling, that kind of thing. So I've had those experiences, and I've had clients and students that have had those experiences, and those can be really lovely. They can also be a little bit disconcerting because we're not used to feeling good. So that, not that that will happen, it's not common, but it has happened. The other main concern is just that unpleasant experience. Well, maybe I should talk about neutral. So just briefly, neutral experiences can be disconcerting in their own way because, again, we have this expectation that we should feel something, that our system should shift or change, or something really relaxing should happen, or whatever that might be. So it's normal for neutral to show up, because sometimes we've had caregivers in our past that have related to us in a particular way where it wasn't maybe safe to feel sad or to feel anxious, right? Those unpleasant emotions. And then on the other end, like I've had clients or students who have shared with me that even sometimes as children, when they were happy or having an experience of a pleasant thought and they were smiling, their parents would get upset with them about, what are you smiling about? What do you have to be happy about? And that's a generational kind of suffering that shows up, that gets passed down. So sometimes people get wired to be in this really neutral space throughout the course of their lives. And they're always in this kind of state of like, oh, it's not that important because it's not safe to feel much of anything. Okay, so that's normal. And then finally, that unpleasant emotion state is where anger, tears, anxiety show up. And this is where we can get in that state of overwhelm that I get concerned about with clients not moving into that space if they can help it. So we're going to practice in a state, which I've talked about before in previous seminars, on a scale of 0 being no unpleasant emotion at all, and 10 being like the most traumatic thing you've ever been through. We try to practice in that 3 to 4 range, sometimes 5. For people who've had a lot of counseling around their trauma, had students and clients who have been to previous teachers and therapists. And so sometimes they want to move into those upper levels of their trauma. And so I don't want people to push themselves, but if you have enough practice under your belt, then that's eventually where we do actually move into opening those doors. But here, I would rather you not do that, okay? So I want you to disengage if that over anxious or unpleasant or backdraft starts to show up, where we feel this incredible kind of rush of difficult or unpleasant emotions. The other thing that happens is that often we might feel more closed off in our experience. So throughout the day, we kind of close in, skeptical or not feeling very safe or a little bit distracted or defensive. So that closing is normal. That's something that happens. So if that happens to you, it's okay to sit back and watch. If it's too uncomfortable, it's okay to disengage. Other people have this tremendous experience of like, yes, this is exactly what I've been looking for, and I can handle this, and this feels amazing. That happens sometimes too. And so anywhere in between, you can kind of monitor that, kind of like a faucet. You turn it to full blast, or you can turn it down to a trickle, kind of deciding, setting an intention of, even with the seminar, of how open or closed you want to be. And again, I'm not there to judge you, which even in person, I acknowledge this information. And so just allowing yourself to monitor and be with that in whatever way is going to be helpful to you. Okay. So always we go over immediate self-care options. So if we start to feel a little uncomfortable and we need to disengage a little bit, but we still want to stay with the seminar or still engaged with the practices that come later or the information that comes later, as always, the experience of feeling so uncomfortable that you need to leave, that's good practice of discontinuing the practice or shutting down the seminar altogether. The other thing is just coming into awareness of the breath. So I'm going to have you take a deep in breath for just a moment. And then nice and slow on the out breath. And again, deep inhalation, nice and slow. And you can do this just at your own pace. You don't have to follow me. Noticing the nourishment of the in-breath. Just feeling the sensation and noticing the ease of letting go. Okay. And then just noticing how you feel right now. And remember, even this is implicitly compassionate. And so, just like I mentioned on the previous slide, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations may show up, or emotion states may show up. So whatever you're experiencing, that's okay. The practice is just noticing what shows up. It's not about changing the experience. You're just following the breath. Generally, it has the tendency to settle the emotions a little bit or to settle the body, but it won't always happen that way, depending on your particular wiring, your particular history, your particular genetics, and your relationship to your disease process, or as a caregiver, right? So all of that history comes into this moment. So people can have very different experiences. The other thing is grounding your awareness into extremities. So just beginning to gently massage or tap your hands or fingers. And I've showed you different ways to do this, kind of tapping up on the chest or slowly, or even tapping on the leg, the knee, or just feeling the hands gently contracting and expanding. And now placing awareness into the feet, just noticing how the feet feel, perhaps wiggling the toes a little bit. If they're resting on the ground, just noticing the sensations toward the toes, the soles of the feet, and back towards the heels, just noticing the sensations of being supported by the ground. Okay. And now again, just noticing how you feel in the body, having grounded that awareness in the extremities. And people often wonder how I practice most of the time, because the feet tend to be further away from the heart. And I'll talk a little bit more about emotions in the body. That's going to be kind of our focus today, is warmth and body. So I tend to go for the feet when I'm feeling overly a little bit emotional, or feeling like I need to settle my system a little bit, is I place my awareness while I'm standing or seated just on my feet on the ground. And sometimes I'll rock my knees back and forth a little bit, kind of like this on the ground. So I can feel those sensations in the feet, kind of like a rocking kind of experience. And then I just do that for a few moments. Doesn't have to be very long. And then I just come back to stillness and notice how I'm feeling. And then ambient sound. So I'm just gonna just begin listening to sounds in the room where you're at. And I'm gonna ring the bowl so that you have something in case it's completely silent. And just listening, allowing the sounds to come and go just as sounds. Okay. So just noticing how you feel in this moment. And sometimes I'll do this as well. If I need just a moment, I'll stop, close my eyes, and just listen to sounds, just coming and going as sounds. And of course, thoughts will show up, little that internal chatter. And so then you just return to the sounds, and then just noticing how you feel. And then I introduced this practice last week, so we're just going to do it briefly. So just begin to make the sound of ah. So ah, and try to make sound. I want you to make sound, just the ah sound. Ah. It's okay if you're out of time with me, it doesn't matter. Ah. So again, in the research, just noticing how that feels. That's the universal sound of relaxation in every culture across the globe. And now you're going to kind of tilt your head sideways and then make the sound, oh, like you're seeing a puppy or a kitten struggle to get up the stairs. Oh, one more time. Oh, okay. So notice how that feels in the body. So that's the universal sound of compassion. When we hear a story of someone hurting or suffering in some way, we often mostly tilt our head and then we make that "aw" sound, even just briefly. If you draw that out, it really engages your whole physiology in starting to release some of the hormones that engage that felt sense of compassion, which is that kind of softening and grounding in the body. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. Last time we talked about the first rule of mindfulness is that the mind wanders. So that means that we are often thinking about other things. The mind becomes active. And we do this about 50% of the time, so 46.9 to be accurate. And the researchers are referenced there. And this part of the brain does those three things in succession. It creates a sense of self. It's not really who we are. It's our kind of like ego of what we think we are. And then we project this self into the future and into the past. And then we focus on problems. And in the research, they call this a negativity bias. We're always on the lookout for problems. And even we tend to have a way of relating to our world with, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that, or here's the kind of person that I don't want in my life. So we have this way of describing what we want by describing what we don't want. So that's our negativity bias. We're all very well trained from generation to generation in doing that. And our system, from an evolutionary standpoint, is wired to do that because it's on the lookout for predators. It's more interested in your survival, but not so much in your happiness. So mindfulness helps us to pull out of that, which we'll get to here in a moment. So suffering is the wish. So this is how neuroscientists and Buddhist psychology define suffering. And it's the wish that things be different than the way that they are. So if I'm sitting here and I don't like how cold it is in the room right now, which is actually right now a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm just noticing that. And so I wish it was warmer. So I have a little bit of a blanket draped over my legs, right? And so I might respond to that discomfort, but it's a measure of suffering. And so I wish that things were different. If I feel that or interpret that as being pain, and if I resist it, if I like, it's as though internally I like relate to it like clenched fists, right? Then exponentially, how I relate to that is going to make the suffering expand. So the cold is bad enough, right? But then the way that I'm relating to it, so we call this first arrow suffering. Buddhist psychology describes it as first arrow suffering, the pain that is non-negotiable in life. It's like I can't like make it immediately warm. I could change the thermostat so that that shifts and things, but for if I'm outside, for instance, and I don't have any resources, the pain is bad enough of the cold, but then the way that I'm relating to it is what we call second arrow suffering. And that's how I'm relating to it with resistance. I don't want it to be like this, right? And so my whole body starts to clench, and I was already cold, and now maybe I was at like a 5 of discomfort, but because I'm all clenched up now I'm at like a 10 in discomfort and I feel like I'm anxious, right? So pain times resistance equals suffering. The other thing can happen as well is when we experience pleasure. Let's say it's suddenly warm and I'm like, yeah, oh, I'm going to be warm for the rest of my life. I will never experience cold again. And then it starts to get cold because everything changes in life. And then I start to strive to make it be warm again, no matter how much maybe I don't have the resources to do that. And so pleasure times striving also equals suffering. So I engage in this kind of false belief system that I can control everything, right? Control is kind of a falsehood. I can't control everything, and there's largely not a lot that I do control. A lot of things can go wrong in life, right? That sense of suffering. And so this is the way that we relate to that first arrow suffering, the things that I can't change at all. And then the way that I relate to it is that second arrow suffering. So mainly we're working with that second arrow suffering to begin to relate to both at the same time in a very intentional way, right? So mindfulness helps us to disengage the default mode network, that part of our brain that's on the lookout constantly for problems, that negativity bias. So mindfulness helps to pull us out of that. So mindfulness is defined as awareness. Remember that sense of the cultivation of awareness. So researchers define this as paying attention to what's happening while it's happening with acceptance or non-judgment, right? So that second arrow suffering, we're learning rather than being reactive to learn, right? Reactive, that like this. We're learning how to relate to it in a more open way and with an intention behind it to be kind or gentle or compassionate, right? So that first intention that we practice in mindfulness is being, can I accept this? Can I be non-judgmental about it? Then the second part of it is with more intention, we practice the awareness. I become more aware that I am reactive, I'm fighting, I'm flighting, or I'm freezing within my experience, right? I'm all clenched up. And then if I can place an intention on that, then I open up and I say, maybe from my values, my spirituality, or my religion, I can open up to this and open up to my pain with the intention of being warm, loving, peaceful, open, or sometimes fierce. It means that maybe we need to have a little bit of that intentional tension to set a limit or a boundary around some of the ways that maybe people behave around us, kind of learning how to set those limits. So I'm not going to go into detail about this, but we've talked about in previous seminars the benefits of mindfulness. There are these improvements that happen in the research that have been studied. There's reductions in stress level and trauma, activation in pain centers, and then regulation of all kinds of neurotransmitters and neurochemicals and biochemicals within the body. So the physiology of self-compassion and self-criticism is that we tend to go into these threat defense system responses when we feel like we're under physical threat, which I just talked about a little bit, is we go into freeze response where there's nothing we can do and we just kind of huddle in, right, that clenching again. Or we flight, right? We run away, we got to get away from everything. Or we fight, we put up our dukes and say, you know, I'm going to fight this experience. So those are the ways that we resist predators, right? The wish that things be different than the way that they are. I wish I wasn't under attack, so I'm going to engage in that stress response. What happens with the sense of what default mode network does in modern society is it creates this sense of self, and then we feel the need to protect our sense of self constantly. And so we get caught up when someone criticizes us. We might freeze and be like, oh, I'm a bad person. I'm depressed, I am anxious. So we kind of make all these I am statements as though they were permanent. So we get self-absorbed and stuck. And that's not a judgmental phrase. That's just what we do as human beings. Okay, so that's normal. It's a part of that protective system. The second thing in flight is we have a tendency to withdraw and self-isolate and cut ourselves off from our own body. So as though everyone else in the world is having the happiest time in the world, and we're the only one that's suffering. So we have this tendency to feel alone and isolated. And then the third way we turn it inward is we criticize. And so often when we begin to relate in compassion, which is defined as mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness or self-kindness when it comes to self-compassion, when we go to give that to ourselves, there's all this kind of judgment that will show up. So the threat defense systems turned inward sometimes will get stronger, right? That's that backdraft showing up. So the way that we can relate to this is, again, those three kinds of reactions to self-compassion show up. And why we need that is because default mode network is always on the look for danger. So when we go to give ourselves compassion, our perception will say, oh, I notice that you're going to give me kindness, but wow, remember all those times in my life when people have been cruel and mean, right? So default mode network functions on contrast, right? Our perception needs contrast to be on the lookout for danger. Right. And so when we think about our relationships and someone sometimes goes to give us love or kindness or gentleness, we might reject it because we remember all the times that our caregivers, those people who are supposed to be caregivers, maybe hurt or harmed us in some way. Or maybe our dating history has been hurtful, or our experience with medical providers have been hurtful, or we're not getting good news, right? So there's this phrase that we use in the course of mindful self-compassion that says, love reveals all things unlike itself. So our default mode network is constantly wired to be looking for that risk and danger. And so we have this natural suspicion toward compassion or this fear, right? If we continue to be aware of that system, right? So just like I'm explaining it to you now, and then we practice through that contrast and experience of constantly being on the lookout for danger, then we're resource building internally to learn how to be with that, yeah, that's going to happen sometimes, that I might get hurt, but is it universally true? Will every person always hurt me? And to varying degrees, we do hurt each other a lot. We make decisions that aren't in the best interest of others. But in general, we're going to find those loving people. You can probably think of a few people right now who are people that have that sense of kind of warmth and gentleness and kindness that make you smile when you think of them. Okay, so that fear of compassion is normal. It's something that is a part of learning how to be in relationship with suffering, right? Because the fear of compassion itself is that second arrow suffering as well, right? We have the thing that we're going through, and then we need that human connection, that sense of warmth. And then we can have a tendency to kind of avoid it or be fearful because we don't want to be perceived as fearful. We don't want to get hurt. We don't want to feel like we're being selfish or that. So we have this tendency to then drop back into threat defense system, that fight, flight, freeze response. So some of the things that happen around this in opposition to warmth and kindness and gentleness is that people will often engage in like, Barcha, what will I do if I'm not hard on myself, if I'm not cold toward myself, right? So this is research on one of my favorite researchers and a teacher, and does a lot of work. She's on faculty at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley right now, but she did research at Stanford University. This is Kelly McGonigal, who actually just finished a book that got released this year on the benefits of movement, which I highly recommend. Any of her books is really helpful on eustress, the essential stress that we need to keep moving forward in life, as well as mindfulness and self-compassion. So what happens around this self-criticism is that people kind of get bought into like, Barcha, what will I do if I'm not hard on myself? So in the research, what is found, particularly through Kelly's research, is that self-criticism is far more destructive than it is helpful. That even when we get moving through life, so people do power through with self-criticism, but that's very different than if they were to learn a way of being more self-compassionate. So a number of studies have found through hundreds of people that this internal kind of being more compassionate is helpful in losing weight, pursuing academic goals, and improving social relationships and performance. And this gets impaired when we engage in ongoing self-criticism, right? It's a predator. So when we self-criticize, even towards ourselves, even if we think that we're like driving ourselves through or being persistent, that actually becomes destructive. So what they find in the research is that self-criticism actually slows our progress from what it could be, and we're less likely to achieve goals. So again, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It does. I actually have a lot of clients who often come to me who are very, very successful, and they're like, Barcha, my life has no meaning, and I've driven away everyone who's important to me, and I'm not happy. But I have like all of these things. I have an amazing business. I'm very successful. People look up to me, all of this, but I'm hurting inside. That's that self-criticism outcome. Like, we can appear a certain way on the outside, but that doesn't mean that we're happy, right? Self-criticism puts us in a state of self-inhibition and self-punishment. When I teach this, mainly at conferences, I often tell people, it's like, imagine if I am your supervisor who's there supposed to be supporting you, and I just criticize you all day long. How much are you going to be able to focus, get things done, to be accurate as you're writing things or memorizing things, right? So this threat defense system gets activated. We have a tendency to disengage from goals. We get into a cycle of rumination of like, where's the next problem within myself that I can jump on and start beating up or beating down or being driven to get away of. So we have this tendency, it wastes our time and causes actual procrastination and we get caught in a cycle of self-loathing. We get into an emotional, and because of high stress hormones, so when we're under attack, our stress hormones increase in our body, and then that wears down, starts to tear down ourselves at the cellular level, and then we get this physiological and emotional wearing out. It also makes us more susceptible to disease processes, and these decreases in focus, clarity, and overall productivity is reduced. Right, so self-criticism, while people have a tendency, particularly in Western society, to really value that, it's very self-destructive. Self-criticism is self-destructive. And so it's not your friend, it's not going to help you. It ultimately is just interested in you surviving in some form, but is not interested in your happiness. So we've been talking about the last couple of sessions of this process of soothing touch, gentle vocalizations, and then today we're talking a little bit more about emotional and physiological warmth. So what happens within this is that when we engage in touch and we talk sweetly, kindly, warmly to ourselves, and then we engage that warmth through the touch, through the gentle vocalizations of having this sense of warmth, then that settles, right? That settles our sympathetic nervous system, right? So this is based on a lot of research, the tended friend research of Dr. Taylor from 2000, the mammalian caregiving system of Steller and Keltner in 2014, and then Compassion, the Evolutionary Analysis from Goetz Keltner and Simon Thomas from 2010. So what they find in this is that this mammalian caregiving system, how we activate it, right? So remember the 3 reasons why we have compassion is because we have vulnerable offspring. We want to choose partners who are kind and gentle, and we want to have non-kin, like community relationships that are supportive, right? So that's the reason, because we're so vulnerable when we come into the world, we're vulnerable to predators. So we have to have these caregiving systems that respond to suffering so that we survive. So when we get caught in an unsafe or even self-critical kind of experience, the sympathetic nervous system activates. That's that far right part of the slide. Our pupils dilate, our salivation goes away, our heart rate starts to go fast, we dilate in our bronchi so that all these stress hormones can start releasing and endorphins releasing in the body so we can run or fight. It also, our digestive system shuts down and it inhibits contraction of the bladder. So we can get so scared that we pee ourselves so that we can actually get away and not have to worry about, and it actually creates a scent and all that. So what I'm getting at here is that all of our physiological, what we call emotions, is not just brain. We experience the world through sight and sound and all of our senses, and then it sends signals to the brain that then send messages into the body. So the primary nerves that go from the brain into the body through the brainstem, right, go into the face, right, that salivation, the throat, getting choked up, the heart rate and tension in the chest, and shutting down the stomach. So that's when we get upset, right? That's what we feel in emotion. And then if we can relate through soothing touch, gentle vocalizations, and this sense of warmth towards ourselves, and that starts releasing activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So our pupils go back to normal. We can see all of the opportunity in our peripheral vision. Our salivation comes back. We slow our heart rate. The bronchi constrict because we don't need as much of that oxygen going on. And then it stimulates digestion. And then our bladder contracts so we can control that much better, right? So this is how we engage in this tend and befriend through this kind of warmth in the body. The benefits of self-compassion, emotional, relational, and biological. We've gone over this before, okay? So let's go into the first practice. So just like we talked about last session, that name it, tame it practice, right? That gentle vocalization practice. So the other part of it is that if we can feel something in our body, then that actually allows us to be able to engage that parasympathetic nervous system, help soothe the whole system. We tend and befriend our own body. And so that allows us to feel where we're hurting, to tend to it, and start releasing those hormones that are going to help support us, right? We're just being aware of it. And then, two, if we have chronic pain going on or something new shows up, through mindfulness, we become so aware of our emotions in our body that when something feels off, we're more likely to contact our neurologist or our primary care physician or our psychiatrist if we have medication management for emotional health going on, or our therapist, right? And so it gives us an awareness of what we need in the moment. So you can't heal what you can't feel. And so many people are disconnected from movement in their body or what's going on through disease process. We have a tendency to just close in and stop moving, that then we start getting disconnected from all the benefits of feeling our whole body, of being fully aware. Okay, so this practice is the feel it, heal it practice. So this is an informal practice. So what I want you to do is just call to mind. So that what I mean by that is the story and the images of a difficulty that generates a little bit of stress in the body. Again, on the 10 scale, that 3 to 4 range, 5 if you're feeling more comfortable with the practice. So where you notice a little bit of stress going on, or lower level physical pain when you start to get that low ache that maybe happens in the body with a lot of the clients I work with chronic pain. So just calling that to mind. So for me, I'm calling into mind some of that chronic pain that I have on the right-hand side of my body when it gets cold outside. Okay, and so now just locate where you feel this most strongly in the body. You don't even have to worry about naming an emotion. Just noticing where you feel the stress most strongly in the body. And with an intention of curiosity, or if you're comfortable with compassion, so you're just kind of even repeating the word compassion, just lean internally into that part of the body. Just like we watch the breath or pay attention to sounds, just kind of leaning into that part of the body, just in the mind, not physically, just the mind. And then just feeling your way into the sensations. And then just noting in the mind, so just repeating internally what you're feeling. A little ache. Coldness. Tension. Kind of full feeling. So just whatever it is for you, just naming that. And then seeing if any thoughts are showing up. Where are the roots, or what's the story maybe that's behind this? What is the story that I'm telling myself? You can even just internally name that. Just say, oh, story. There's the story that goes back to maybe when this happened, or when I first noticed, or an accident that's related to it, or what is that that's going on. And then internally asking yourself, what does this emotion need? What does this sensation need? What are some actions that might make sense? So this could even be external things like calling your doctor to say, hey, I've noticed something different, or connecting with your mental health provider if you have one, or maybe engaging one if you don't have one. Or maybe taking a warm bath. Maybe the body needs to move a little bit more. It's been still for too long. Or maybe a hot cup of tea. It's just noticing what practical self-care, self-compassion might make sense. And then if you wish, just making physical contact with it. So if your heart is racing a little bit, placing a hand over the heart, giving a hug, right? Remember the soothing touch practice. So we can engage that. I'm just placing my hand over my right knee because I'm noticing the pain there. Just making physical contact with that location in the body if it's safe to do so. And just honoring your human vulnerability. Right? Now just allowing your awareness to come back and just internally asking yourself, just like we have been doing, what did I notice during the practice? Is there something that was challenging about that? Was it difficult? Was it helpful? Was there something I discovered differently about my body or my capacity to relate to my body? How are you feeling right now? What are you noticing in your body and emotions right now? And if some difficulty showed up, you can just continue to attend to yourself in whatever way you need to. Has anything shifted or changed as a result of doing this practice? Right? So we were just being with the moment through that practice. And then sometimes things might shift or change as a result of doing the practice, but we're just noticing what's happening in the moment, the only moment that we have. And so moving into um, our more formal practice. So if you want to right now, you can allow yourself to lie down, to just be in a seated position, um, whatever might be helpful to you. Just allowing yourself to be as comfortable as possible. You want to be in a more kind of what works as a relaxed position for you, something that's comforting, pillows, um, kind of eliminating any kind of discomfort that might show up by just being in the posture that you're in. Right. So once you're in that position, and it's okay if you're still adjusting, just it's okay to do this as you can. Just allowing the eyes to soften or close. And just becoming aware of how the body feels in this moment. And just coming into 3 deep cleansing breaths just at your own pace. and allowing the breath to move into its own natural rhythm. And begin by just becoming aware of the toes. Just noticing the toes for a moment. Noticing what they feel like. You can wiggle them if you're having a hard time feeling them right now. Or if there's numbness, that's okay. Just continue to direct your awareness to what you can feel. Just noticing, what does this part of my body need? Perhaps the toes are numb and I can't feel them. And so maybe just sending them a sense of kindness. So you can use an image, the breath, like breathing in light or warmth, or just repeating the word kindness as you breathe in and out of the toes. It's like you've moved the breath to that part of the body. And then moving awareness to the feet. We're kind of dividing attention a little bit. So just kind of a flow back and forth between both feet, just noticing. Perhaps the feet might be achy or having difficulty in some way. So you can send compassion, or perhaps breathing in a sense of gratitude that despite not feeling very good, that the feet still do the best that they can to help support you. Moving awareness upward through the ankles. Feeling what's there and then sending what is needed. When the mind wanders, just coming back to the body part that you were last remembering, and then moving on to the next one that is noted. Feeling the lower legs, shins, calves, perhaps even the bone internally. Just breathing in what is needed. Moving up through the knees. The upper legs. Perhaps softening into that part of the body. Perhaps there's tension. So just softening in could be a sense of compassion or love or warmth. Moving awareness up into the hips. And then breathing compassion all the way from the toes up through the hips. And then moving awareness into the fingers. Up through the full hand and the wrists. And it's okay to stay at a previous part of the body that you wanted to stay at. or moving on to some part of the body that feels good. If anything starts to feel uncomfortable, or paying attention to that part is just not working for you. Moving awareness to the forearms. Moving up to the elbows. The upper arms and shoulders. Breathing in what is needed. Perhaps allowing that part of the body to soften or to let go, letting go of any excess tension in that part of the body. Moving up through the very upper back, the traps. The upper and mid back, just breathing in awareness. Breathing in what is needed. Breathing awareness into the lower back. Down into the buttocks or glutes. There may even be a sense of appreciation of how much this part of the body works hard to support us. We spend a lot of time sitting and allowing our lower back to try to support us as best it can. Sometimes these parts of the body suffer in some way. So just sending through the mind a sense of warmth, kindness, gratitude, peace, just whatever you feel this part of the body needs. And then moving forward through the body into the genitalia, this part of the body we don't often pay attention to it in this way. Sometimes it can feel like something we shouldn't do. So many functions in this part of the body, perhaps a sense of awe and wonder of all that this part of the body does. Elimination and recreation, pleasure, sometimes pain. Just breathing a sense of warmth and kindness toward this part of the body as well. And if it's uncomfortable, it's okay to stay back with another part of the body or part of the body that feels good, or disengaging if that's too uncomfortable. Okay. Moving into the organs of the abdomen, the tummy, the stomach. Perhaps allowing a sense of openness in the breath here. Moving upward through the rib cage, the organs in the rib cage, the heart, the lungs. This particular part of the body that keeps us alive at a very basic level of oxygen, the breath. Perhaps such an appreciation for how this whole system works together. And then moving up into the throat and neck. Just allowing a sense of noticing. What does this part of the body need? And now moving into the jaw, the mouth, tongue and cheeks, the ears, nose, breathing in what is needed, the forehead, the brain itself. And now just begin breathing compassion through the whole body breathing. Drawing in compassion, perhaps through the top of the head, on down through the toes. Breathing out through the toes. Drawing the breath through the top of the head, down through the body, back out through the toes, just at your own pace. And then reversing that, breathing compassion from the toes upward through the body. And then breathing out as though you're breathing out through the top of the head. And then just being in stillness for a moment, just noticing how the body feels. And as you're ready, allowing the eyes to open once again. So just noticing what you've noticed during the practice, what that was like, what that felt like. What are you noticing in the body? What was the mind doing? And has anything shifted or changed for you? Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral experiences are expected. And just noticing how that feels. So as always, practice resources at Kristen Neff's website, Chris Germer's website, the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, all free, guided, downloadable meditations, and particularly Kristen and Chris's website have videos as well, educational videos, so you can do some more exploration on your own. And if you often type their names into YouTube, quite a few speaking engagements will show up where they're giving a lot more detailed information about self-compassion. And then my website, again, www.emfm.space, has a couple of resources there. And so thank you so much for joining us for Mindful Compassion Hour. Feel free to join us our next session, as those will be rolled out week to week through the Northwest Parkinson's Foundation website. All of the sessions are downloadable, not downloadable, they're free, and available. And all of the previous ones that we've done are archived. And so please join us for our next session, where we'll continue exploring more practices of this intention of compassion toward our suffering, having a relationship with our difficult experiences rather than fighting or flighting or freezing in relationship to them. But just learning how to have that nurturing, connected relationship if it's important. So may you be free from inner and outer harm. May you be happy, peaceful, and free. May you be kind, loving, and forgiving toward your own imperfections and the imperfections of others. May you be as healthy as possible and live with ease. May you be free from suffering and experience joy wherever it may be found. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.